revolutionary concept. From discovering limitations in traditional coordinate systems at the age of 14, so we're dealing with somebody really smart, okay, everyone, right? And founding Hypernomics. Doug's journey is a testament to resilience and innovation. In this episode, we'll explore Hypernomics, Doug's groundbreaking method of analyzing market actions in 4 or more dimensions, okay, and how it offers a fresh perspective on wealth building. So let's get ready to delve into a new world of strategic thinking and market insights. Let's get it started.
Welcome to War Games, hosted by the sales genius Joe Ingram. If you're looking to win the sales battle, then you have joined the right team. In the War Games group, we devise strategies for sales, marketing, branding, mindset, and attitude. We enlist the assistance from the most successful producers across all industries. We then share their knowledge and techniques with you. Our single goal is to get you ready for your next sales opportunity. When it comes to crossing the minefield of sales, step in the footprints of those that have crossed before you. Now, prepare yourself for boot camp and beyond. It's time for the War Games to begin.
All right, let's get ourselves some VIPs on the stage. We got Brian Galke, as always. JR is joining us once again. And the man of the half hour, Doug. Doug, I didn't want to scare you and go, an hour? No, that's not what he said. But
that's fine either way. But yeah, well, thank you, Joe, so much for having me. It's my great pleasure to be here. I really appreciate it.
The pleasure is ours. So I'm starting off. Sorry, phone is going off already with people going, ask him a question. So so I went through a little bit more of a bio than most people know, right?
Sure.
So your journey when you were battling kidney failure to founding Hypernomics, right, is an inspiring journey. Can you share how, the personal experience shaped your discovery and development of Hypernomics?
Sure. Yeah. As my bio says, when I was about 14 or 15, and I'm back in high school or junior high, I was exposed to the coordinate systems that we usually see then. It's known as the Cartesian coordinate system. There's a 2D version of that, and basically tells you going left and right and up and down. And then there's a 3D version that adds going in and out for depth. And I always understood what it was trying to do, but I always thought, well, is there more to it than that? And not long after I had that thought, I discovered I had kidney disease, and it's very scary for somebody that's just a kid. Back then, modern transplants weren't available. Dialysis was kind of iffy for a few people, and you weren't assured of anything, let alone a long life. And so I just started running to try to take some load off my kidneys, and that seemed to help out a lot. And so 21 years later, I went on to dialysis, and then I got a cadaveric kidney, a dead person's kidney, that after a year and a half. That kept me going for a while, but never really worked perfectly well. And then 7 years after that, I got my good friend Tim Schreiner. Tim's sitting right here in my front pocket. He gave me his kidney 22 years ago. So my kidney can drink now. Yeah, it's of age. So and the interesting thing was that once I got the kidney, my body was full of all this poison that your kidney pulls out of you. And once I got the kidney, my brain cleared up, and I was able to think in new ways. And I basically discovered Hypernomics watching my wife buy a washing machine, of all things. And so what Hypernomics is, the way my wife was buying a washing machine, and what it relates to here is it takes some very simple things that you already know and combines them into something you haven't seen before, but you need to know. So let's take the simple example of a washing machine. So as we're going up there, my wife is telling me, she says, we need a new one. She said, the machine we have at home doesn't have a very big drum. We need to have a bigger drum. And so I thought capacity versus price. And I think we all know the bigger the drum, I mean, you get to these big industrial giants, the bigger the capacity, the more you're paying for it. And I thought, okay, she's working a what we would call a two-dimensional problem out there. And then she said, well, we only have one delegate cycle at home. I'd like to have more cycles. And I thought to myself, now she's adding cycles against price. She's up to a 3D problem right here. And so I liked the machine that we were looking at, and so did she. And then we saw the next one up the line. And I said, well, what about this guy? And she says, it's too expensive. We can't afford it. And I realized that our single purchase was going to move the quantity for this unit sold 1 unit to the left. It was going to, or just one more unit was going to be added, which meant that we were adding to the total quantity that was going to be sold in the year. And the one we were buying was going to sell more than the one that was just above it, but not as much as the other ones that were below it. And so I realized we were part of an overall demand scheme. So we were part of the quantity element too. So my wife was solving for capacity, cycles, price, and quantity all at the same time, all in her head, juggling this stuff all around. So it turns out that we all do this all the time in every market that we enter that's not a simple commodity. So it's basically finding out how people respond to, say, the features in that washing machine or a car or a plane or a boat or anything you buy, and then trying to balance that against the demand. And it turns out that you need these extra dimensions. So hyper means existing in more than 3 dimensions, and nonomy, N-O-M-Y, is a field of study. So hypernomics is a field of study that exists in more than 3 dimensions. So we start with 4 dimensions and we go from there.
Okay, that's impressive. So now we're all doing this, or you said everybody's doing it, right? JR's
You're
a little
doing
slower, so he probably
all the
doesn't do
panelists
it
are
that
doing
way.
it. All your audience members are doing it. Yes, every last person on the planet is doing this.
Okay, how can we take advantage of that from our standpoint of being the person selling a product or a service?
Well, the main thing is that if you're going to sell a new product, what happens is where people actually have products, they form little points. We call them dots. You can actually map where your competition is. Just like you can see where the Starbucks are in your city, and that forms the map. You don't want to be next. If you're buying a Starbucks franchise, maybe unless you're in Seattle, you can be right across the street from another one. You probably want to be far away from other Starbucks, but still in a population center. And so one of the things that Hypernomics does is it lets you create these maps for yourselves to see where the competition is with respect to the features rather than the geography. So for example, when we're talking about that washing machine there, if everybody had washing machines that had 3 cubic feet, and then somebody had one that was 5 cubic feet and 6, and somebody had one that was 1.5, but nobody had one that was 3, well, geez, there's a space in there for there's one between 2 and 4. You could make a 3-footer. And so you'd want to try to use these dots to figure out where there are gaps in the market and put something in there. Now, if you're already building something, you're already selling something, the math of this, there's software that we've invented to pull out these features. The math lets you figure out if something is overvalued or undervalued. And if you're overvalued, if you overpriced your product, this math will help you figure out what will happen if you drop your price. You're going to probably sell more. It lets you figure out if you're going to actually profit more. If you're underpriced, of course, then it would tell you to raise the price so you can make more money. And why that sounds really simple, there's several billionaires that have gotten this completely wrong. And so one of the things we've done is proven that these people were wrong in what they were doing. And had they taken the time to do this type of analysis, there was a couple of cases where people would have not lost billions, and they did. They just simply didn't understand how the market worked. And had they applied these very simple principles, they would have not lost these billions of dollars.
So I know that all of your work in putting this together for people to plot out and to do this, right? And I know the people that are visual people are going, he's just saying a bunch of stuff and I don't know what he means, right? When it comes to plotting out the different things. And you're saying, basically, you're teaching us how we can look at every product that's out there, customize ours to drop in where it needs to be in the market, so we
Right.
can dominate, right?
Yeah,
So,
you'll have
and,
you
and
have your own little corner of the market if you do that, Joe.
that's fantastic. And so we
Yeah.
have, right? And we know that other people have already seen this from you, like NASA, Virgin Galactic, right? Lockheed Martin. They've already
Right.
stopped and said, "Hey, Doug, how do I get my piece of the market?" So can you share like maybe a success story, right? From that
Yeah,
unique situation, and your insight was like smack, okay, grand slam.
yeah, I mean, so I don't want to intimidate your listeners by thinking that, geez, I got to be a Fortune 500 company to use this. So during COVID, we had a restaurant down the street that we frequented, and here in California, they made it so that you had to eat outside at the beginning of COVID. In the beginning of 2020, you could eat at restaurants, but it had to be outside. And the restaurant we went to had this really large capacity inside. It was something over 100 people. And then outside, they only had seating for about 30. So we were going down there a couple weeks, and the line was out the door, and we'd always could get a seat pretty quickly before on a Friday or a Saturday night. And now the line's going out the door. And so I looked at their seating arrangement that they had. So they had 4 tables of 4 and 3 tables of 6. There's 3 tables of 4 and 3 tables of 6, and then just a couple of tables for 2. And so I pulled aside the manager, whom we knew pretty well at this point. I said, "Hey, Kayla, would you like to make more money?" She said, "Well, sure, Doug. What do I have to do?" Well, most of the people that come into your restaurant, because I've observed this, come in parties of 1 and 2. And you've got these tables set up for 4 and 6. You need to take some out, some of the tables for 4 and 6 out, and swap them out for more tables of 2. And you'll make more money. And it turns out that when you study this, and there's a whole industry dedicated to studying this, there's more than twice as many parties of 2 entering restaurants as there are parties of 4. And so when she did this simple switch, her revenue shot up 25% in 2 months and helped save the restaurant. So this is real simple stuff sometimes that you can just push the analytics into a situation, and then figure out what to do based on the analytics. Now, it can get more complicated than that, but that's the basic idea, is that it's pattern recognition. It's trying to recognize patterns in everything that we do. And there turns out to be a whole bunch of patterns that people hadn't seen before, because we're only using 2 and 3 dimensions at one time. So when I talk to you about, for example, one of the best examples we have is that in 2013, there were a whole bunch of electric cars that had something around 100 horsepower and something around 100 miles of range. So there was the Nissan Leaf, and there was a Mitsubishi i-MiEV, and there were a whole bunch of cars that had just a little bit of horsepower and a little bit of range. And then there were the 2 pairs of Teslas that they had, their initial Model S's, that had 300 horsepower and almost 250 or 300 miles of range, and there was nothing in between. And so what you already know intuitively is, I'm going to pay more for an electric car if I have more horsepower. I'm going to pay more if I have more range. Well, both of those features combine and create a series of plots in space, dots in space, that you can actually plot, and you can figure out where the opening is in the market there. So back in 2013, when you had Tesla up at 200, 300 horsepower and all these other cars at 100 horsepower, there existed a space in between for somebody that could make a car that had 200 miles of range and 200 horsepower. But nobody did that for a while, until Tesla made more models. Tesla actually figured out this pretty easily, but the average
Tesla also had to get the profit from the big ones.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah. And so this demand curve then helps figure out where, there's going to be a shape to this. And sometimes there's more money at the top of the market, meaning the more expensive ones. You can sell, 100 times, maybe a million. You might make 100 million down here. Yeah, but very often there's much more money at the bottom of the market, meaning the curve is kind of flat. So you can make more money if you could make a cheaper product. You can make more revenue. And so this helps you figure out where the revenue lies in the market too.
So I'm thinking entrepreneur, right? I'm thinking that, in the smaller side of things. So for me, and I know it's the same with Brian, right? There's live in-person training.
Yes.
Is the top, right?
Mhm.
That's the one that takes the most time for us, but it's also the one we charge the most for,
Right.
right? And then you go, okay, now video training, where I can now do group trainings, things like
Right.
that, right? Then you can go step down a notch. So we need to review everything all the way down. Like I know Brian has he has the flashcards, right, Brian? And so he has flashcards to teach you how to recognize facial features of somebody and talk to them. It's amazing stuff. And he's brilliant at it. So, but when you look at it, that flashcard is a great, what we would call the entry level thing. But there may
Sure.
be more steps in between, or right with your process and your system, it may be going, get rid of the middle one, right? Because there isn't enough for it. And then normally it takes you a year as an entrepreneur, or a year and a half to go, wow, I offer this service, but nobody's jumping on it the way it's supposed to be, right? Now,
Yeah.
in your experience, is it mean raise the price of the one in between, or lower the price in the one in between, or take it out, or is every situation unique?
Well, that's it's a brand new field, and so it's people kind of joke with me. Said, Doug, you do this process to figure out the best price. What's the best price for your product? They go, geez, we're brand new. We can't really figure it out just precisely yet. We're kind of
Right.
honing in
But
on
the
it.
most
But
you'll pay me is my price. Yeah.
yeah, well, yeah, but to your point, what we do is we do have we're forming 2-week classes now where people would have to be we'd like prefer it to be in person, back to your point, because it's hard to find it. I'm looking at you guys. I see a 2-inch square of each one of you on my computer screen here. It's hard to pick up a quizzical look from 2,000 miles away with just a little small picture there. It would be
JR
better to be in
always has
person.
that look. You're okay with that. Yeah. Look, so JR, just
So
because of your quiz, we're gonna make you bigger for Doug. There you go. And that's
yeah,
not what he
that's
was
better.
asking, but he's gonna be punished for doing that. Yes. So
Yeah.
Doug, no respect. No respect. I'm telling you.
So yeah, the flashcards, the equivalent of a flashcard for us would be these little LinkedIn pieces that we put up. We've put up some LinkedIn pieces that have attracted some notice. So, for example, um, right now, maybe some of you may have heard that we're not pals with China or Russia. Maybe you guys know that. And the Russians and the Chinese are working out these things called hypersonic weapons, which means they go really fast, Mach 6, Mach 7. And so, there's just like Dr. Strangelove, there's a perceived missile gap, right? And so
yes.
they got this really fast missile. So we want to get this really fast missile. Well, I studied missiles and I worked out what the demand was for them. And it turns out there's this thing called the frontier that we can discover. I discovered the frontier for air to surface missiles, which is what the hypersonic missiles want to be. And it turns out that line is really tightly packed, which means that you can't vary from it very much. You can't go way beyond it. And so Lockheed decided they were going to build this missile called they called it the Arrow. It was the AGM-183A. And the first unit price is going to be $42 million. And the Congressional Budget Office said, great, we'll buy 100 this or something equivalent to it for $14 million. Well, it turns out that the chance of that happening based on what they've already purchased is less than 1 in a trillion. They are,
Okay.
in math terms, there are 108 standard deviations past what the market will support. So how do I know that? Well, I did the work. I went out and plotted this stuff. And the reason this is important, just a couple of weeks, well, I think 3 or 4 weeks ago, maybe you read or heard about that the Iranians squeezed off a whole bunch of rounds at Israel. Now, Israel, in combination with us and I think the French and the British, we basically knocked down 98% of all the incoming rounds. But during that altercation, we squeezed off half a year's procurement of AIM-9 missiles. And so we put up a whole bunch of money to try to knock this down. So one of the things this is trying to do is it's trying to figure out the optimal way to do anything, including defense. I mean, you can get the job done with something very expensive. Can you get it done with something that's less expensive? That would be one of the questions that we want to answer.
Fantastic.
So, I guess the training though would be, there's the full 2-week class. And then I just came out with my book, Hypernomics, which is over my shoulder here. The book becomes a pretty good primer for figuring out what to do. I mean, once you read all 304 pages of it, you start to develop an appreciation for all the various nuances that it has. And this is the first book on hypernomics. There'll be more. I hope to be able to write the second one. And pretty soon people are going to start to catch on because it is so ubiquitous. I can tell you too, that speaking of how ubiquitous it is, if I can just seemingly diverge, and I promise I'll bring the point back. But
sure.
Just about after I wrote the book, about 3-4 months ago, I found myself, I did a little trail run. I parked my car up on some asphalt. I got done running and I was panting, and I went back up towards my car, and I'm leaning over and I'm looking at the asphalt, and I see a tiny little reddish black ant. And this little reddish black ant and I thought to myself, well, Richard Feynman, the Nobel Prize winning physicist, used to study ants, so I'm going to study the ant. And so I started seeing this little reddish black ant started going a counterclockwise motion. And so after a few tens of seconds, this guy actually traced out 360 degrees. He's doing this in fits and starts, and he's out a little bit further from when he started. And then he does it again. And he's out further still. And then he does it one more time. So he's tracing out a spiral. And I realized as he's hitting the top of these little peaks, he's on asphalt, he's really tiny, he's a quarter to half inch long. He's standing up, he's on the top of a pebble. That's a local high spot for him. And he's going out wider and wider. This little ant was doing reconnaissance. Now, it turns out that these ants, I go home and I type in ant reconnaissance. You guys can do this too. Ant reconnaissance, and type it in my Google search bar. I go, bam! And it turns out these ants have been doing reconnaissance since they came on the planet. And by golly, they look for the same things in a house that you and I do. They want to have a certain amount of floor area. They want the ceiling height to be just right. In their case, they don't want it to be too high because that lets them want to win. You and I would like it higher. And they want it to be clean. Now, if that doesn't sound like this kind of stuff that you and I do when we're looking for a house, it's
correct.
It's strange. And so these ants have been around for 140 to 168 million years. And so they've been doing it since then. So I submit, since we're at least as smart as ants, that we've been doing this ever since we've been on the planet. In fact, the very first humans, the person that's walking on the trail first, he's doing reconnaissance for the whole group. It's part of their gross domestic product. It's part of their GDP. And so this is a very all-encompassing kind of phenomena that, I'm just scratching basically the surface of this thing, because this is the software that we came up with over this shoulder. There's a patent for that. That's an invention. But this math has been around since humanity formed. So that's a discovery. This is a discovery that's potentially could make it so that more products will succeed. Right now, Dr. Clayton Christensen out of Harvard says that 95% of all new product ideas fail. Another way to say that is 5% succeed. Well, what if that 5%, after people start picking this up and making improvements on it, and what if that 5% went to 6%? Well, going from 5% to 6% is a 20% improvement. What if 5 went to 6 to 7 to 8? And maybe over years got up to 10%. Well, that would mean that if it went from 5% to 10%, twice as many ideas, twice as many product ideas became successful. So the potential of this is enormous, and the impact on government is enormous too. Again, we're talking about these demand curves. So in some states, they think you can just raise the taxes on an unlimited basis and you'll keep getting revenue. Well, in 2014, Colorado and Washington State both legalized recreational marijuana. Now, Washington State had a third more people. And at the end of the year, Colorado had $375 million in marijuana revenue taxes. Washington State had 1/7 of that. They had about 50 million. Now, why is that? Well, Colorado's tax rate was about 30%, and Washington State's was 108%. I joke now, 108%.
Oh, wow. And
so they should have known better going in, and eventually they dropped it. But there's a demand curve for taxpayers. So here in California, they keep trying to squeeze the taxpayers. The taxpayers leave, and they go, "Why'd that happen?" Well, there's, if you're a government offering people a place to come to and help help the local economy out, you're being drawn by the tax structure and the climate, the people, and everything else. There's a value, to use our expression, there's a value and demand for taxpayers, and that's lost on governments. And so we're hopeful that the governments will start to pick this up too.
Yeah, they don't listen. And then you want them to read a book? Come on, Doug. You need to get speaking gigs in front of the politicians, because I'm in California. All they do is keep telling me, you don't understand how great it is here and how great our tax structure is. And they take 60 and 70% of what you make. And I'm like, I don't understand. This doesn't seem like the democracy.
So we're in that boat right now, Joe. Yes, that's
an important footnote with both of those is the illegal volume actually went up in 108%, but because it increased demand in the private sector using the Pre-Volstead Act, whatever the ditchweed.
You're exactly right, Jerry. That's exactly what happened. And so you get people, if people don't like paying high taxes. I think most people understand they got to pay some taxes, but there's fair taxation and there's overtaxation. You need to be able to balance the two. I mean, interesting little fact, if you go to Disneyland, the great thing about Disneyland is they sweep the streets up 3 times a day. Every street you go down is swept 3 times a day. You know what happens when you go to Monaco? In Monaco, it's different. They don't do that. They sweep the streets 4 times a day. Now, why is that? Well, they've got some of the richest people in the world going there to stay, because many of European nations have these extremely high tax rates, and so a lot of people migrate there. So do they have no tax? No, they've got a really pretty high value-added tax, and they get plenty of money to sweep the streets 4 times a day. But what they don't do is they don't overtax people, and that's kind of the whole point. You want to try to find the sweet spot. In some states, they found the sweet spot, and other ones they haven't. And so this helps for that too. So military, the government, the private enterprise, this actually works for NFL football players, by the way. Did a little study. This is actually a Moneyball for football players. Instead of being for the team, this is actually for the players. So what we did was we studied NFL wide receivers in 2019 who had gotten past their rookie contract. So everybody had to be at least 26. And then we normalized this for people that are catching 4 balls a game, which several people do. And it turns out, of course, the older you get, the less they're going to pay for you, because that's there's age discrimination the wrong way. But it turns out that before they had the cheetah, the guy that plays for Miami, I forgot his last name, a really fast guy. Before he entered the league, the fastest time for the wide receivers was Tyreek Hill. Before Tyreek Hill entered the league, the fastest wide receiver in 2019 had a 4.4 40-yard dash, and the slowest one had a 4.65 40-yard dash. Now, it turns out that when you worked out the value, what the receivers were getting based on their speed, there was a big premium on speed. And it worked out, if you were going at a 4.65 40 and catching 4 balls a game, if you could take your speed up 1/20th of a second, 0.05 seconds, that would be worth $640,000 to you. And if you're at the top end of that curve, and you could drop your speed from 4.4 to 4.35, well, that was worth just about double. You get about $1.3 million.
Wow.
If you could get that much faster. And so this has implications for all types of conditions. And we're just basically touching a few points here and hoping that the world will take off with it.
That's phenomenal. So you do an excellent job of explaining these very complicated things, right? And breaking it down so we can understand what it is we're saying as far as that. I look and I see, if I'm going to read the book. When I read the book, am I going to see dots everywhere? Right?
Yeah.
I think you are going to go, you walk into a room and you're like, okay, you see a business, you come in and you're like, that you're like plotting everywhere you go.
Yeah, well, I mean, I do start out with dots, and I start out with the simplest dot plot that I knew as a kid. I start out with Hansel and Gretel in the book, and that's not a joke. So what did Hansel and Gretel do? Well, they were led into the woods by their evil parents. They wanted to come home. Who knows why? So how did they get back home? Well, what they did is they put little white pebbles against the dark dirt, and then the moon was bright. And they found their way back with those pebbles. And so those pebbles have very deep significance to them and to hypernomics. The pebble says that in their little walk out to the woods and back, that it's saying, "I was here." That pebble signifies the latitude, the longitude, and the altitude that those kids were at a point in time. And then there's a trail of these things. Well, hypernomics is really no more than finding the buyer equivalent was that I was here. So when I was in that store with my wife, we were pushing out the quantity for that particular washing machine, 1 unit. And where was it? We were buying a machine that had a certain amount of capacity and a certain number of cycles. I was here in what we call the value side, and I was here on the demand side. Now, these was a little bit unobvious to the people at the beginning, is that the demand and the value take place on opposite sides of the same center post, which is price. And that's the breakthrough in thought here, what gets you the 4 dimensions and beyond. And if you go all the way through the book, you'll find I just gave a speech last week, and I was given the best overall paper for it, by the way, for out of 450 people there. You can crank this analysis up to 16 dimensions if you want to, which I did. But what it's really doing is it's basically saying I was here, or the people were here in a variety of ways, and it's just arraying these things the way they need to be placed, and then plotting them, and then figuring out what the math says about where you were and how people are responding to this. There's surfaces and lines that appear that we try to use to describe where people are, and it's nothing more than dot plots. In fact, if I had to sum up the whole book, as I talk about in the introduction, the whole book can be summed down to 2 words: dot plots. Where are the dots? Where did Hansel and Gretel go? Well, that was a dot plot. They created a little dot plot. The science of epidemiology was founded by Dr. John Snow in the 1800s in Soho, England. Dr. Snow famously helped invent anesthesia. He basically put Queen Victoria under by giving her some anesthetic. I think it was chloroform, and she gave birth to her 6th child, because Dr. John Snow basically figured out a way to make it comfortable for her. Also, a very brilliant guy. There was this cholera outbreak in Soho, and he decided to put little marks on a map. He came around with a map, and he was asking people in the area. People didn't have running water. You had to go to pumps back then, and there were several pumps. And what he was trying to do is see where people died in Soho. And so he made little black marks, dots, on a map. And he found that these dots congregated around what was known as the Broad Street pump. And then they did a little bit of research, and they found out that the Broad Street pump was pumping water that was coming from, it was very cool and tasty, but it was below an area that had been a cesspool before. And the cesspool, they'd forgotten about. The cesspool leaked into the water supply and contaminated water. People that drew from that well more frequently than other ones were dying more frequently than the other people in the area. And they founded epidemiology using dot plots. So Hansel and Gretel did some geolocation doing dot plots. Dr. Snow founded epidemiology using dot plots. And this discovery is hypernomics is nothing more than dot plots. And it basically just says that people value things. They like the features the way they like them on one side. And on the other side, they're limited to how much they can buy. And it's the recognition of these balanced forces that is the essence and the root behind hypernomics.
I love it. So we're just connecting dots, which we've been told to do for years. Fantastic. JR, any questions? Brian, any questions? We have
This
creeped past our 30-minute mark.
This
So
is just been
Hypernomics
great.
is still the best website to get a hold of you, Doug? Is that right?
Yeah, go to hypernomics.com or
Okay.
info@hypernomics. You can drop me a note.
Okay.
I'm sorry, JR had a question there. Go ahead, JR.
Well, first kudos. Somebody that thinks more complicated than I do, Joe. So
I am the simpleton of the group. Yes.
yes, there exists a 97.5% chance that that might be right. Speaking of which, we're talking about all of these, I'll call them variables for lack of elements.
Yes.
Not to steal the show with the book. I'm going to get it, but
Okay.
Are you also weighting those elements or just interacting them with each other? I'm saying, is it interacting with itself as well as everything, or are all the models static and you just look at them in a static line like that?
That's an excellent question, JR. It turns out that what we do is we don't want to put any opinion on it at all. So we don't weight the variables, the market, the
Gotcha.
buyers, the people weight the variables. So we've been using the same technique in our fund. We call it the hyper fund. It's completely private. I don't want anybody to think they can buy into it in case I don't want the SEC to come down on us. But in February 2020, we started this fund. And in less than 50 months, we doubled it using only S&P 500 stocks and finding multiple features, back to your point, that would show a certain stock to be undervalued. And so we doubled in less than 50 months. And at the time we did, we were doing 1.9 times as well as the S&P 500, from which we drew all the stocks, and 1.2 times as well as Berkshire Hathaway with Mr. Warren Buffett. So all we're doing here is seeing how the market weighs the stuff. And so the last thing we want to put into the mix is our opinion, because we're not putting billions and trillions of dollars into a market. We're putting in hundreds of thousands of dollars. So our opinion as a consumer doesn't amount to too much. But when you take everybody's opinion collectively, that matters terrifically. And that's kind of what we're trying to shake out of the data, is to see how everybody weighs out what it is that they're doing.
Well, it occurred to me as you were answering the question, we're actually auto plotting the positions based on the relative demands of the individual contributors. They're giving us their bias with their unbiased data point.
Yes, exactly. Right. Yeah, and people vary. But what's interesting here, the other term I didn't use here, is people self-aggregate their behavior collectively. And so that's what lets us figure out what the market limits are. So if you were to take the daily volume of the S&P 500 and plot the number of stocks horizontally and the prices vertically, and then put it into log format so it doesn't spread out, you'd find that there's basically an ellipse of all the stocks that are out there. All 500 are going to form basically it looks like a big oval. There's an upper limit, an outer limit, a lower limit, and an inner limit. And that happens every day in every market that's that size.
Chat GPT 5.0 to the rescue on this one, Joe. That's all I'm going to say.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I was like, okay, how many equations can go on in my head at any one time? So
barely one in my case, but we won't go there.
Yeah.
I was told I should keep equations out of it. So all the equations that in the book are in the footnotes. So the book doesn't have any equations in the text.
Yeah. Oh, I think the restaurant example was really simple for people to understand. And what I was running through my head when you were talking is it's almost like the different social media platforms, right? Each one has its own thing, but you don't go, oh, I'm only going to have Facebook or I'm only going to have Instagram. Instead, you're looking for what's the 3D, the 4D, what are the different ones, but then you have to track how does your audience respond to each one of those. That's kind of what was running through my head when you were talking.
That's a really good way to put it, Brian. Yeah, that's the same thing in a different format. So
no, I agree, because the answer is going to be, where do I spend my time? And you're going to have to start and look and say, is this audience my audience, right? How many times have people said, oh my gosh, you're an adult, you can't be on TikTok? And then, Brian and I have friends that make a lot of money on TikTok. And so it's like, wait, but they're grown people too. I don't get it. What's going on? And it's again, but like you said, Doug, and then JR put it so well, is the weighting, right? The weight of the plot point comes from the demand the customer is placing upon it. And
Yes,
so,
exactly.
right. And like I say, yeah, we're going to go ahead and ban TikTok. Why? They took money away from Facebook ads. They took money away from Bezos and Amazon deliveries, right? And
Sure.
all of a sudden people had a cheaper avenue. And we go, oh my gosh, it's about privacy. And so we got to make sure they go away. But again,
Right.
it's definitely something that you have to look at and go through that. But that's
Exactly.
perfect. So thank you very much, Doug, because you've opened our eyes and our brains into a different area. And I think based on, given the restaurant example, also looking at like the Brian and the subtle skills, starting from training down to flashcards, right? And where do you drop
Sure.
in? Where
Right.
do you put things in, right? So like I wouldn't put flashcards out. Why? Because I don't think there's going to be a demand. But if I started to put something out, I can go test the demand, right? And
Sure.
see what's the price. And is it not demand because of price, or is it that? But again, if you're not tracking it, how can you get it, right? And anything measured
Exactly.
improves. So that would be what I look at. And you're giving us a
Sure.
different way in multiple
Mhm.
dimensions to track these things and position yourself to become the best. So, and I love that.
Yeah. Yeah. You want to find your own niche in the world. And so where everybody is, that's where you don't want to be.
Right.
And that's going to create a what we call a point in value space. And that value is going to be reflected in the sustainable price. And then you'll be able to go over to the demand curve and figure out how many you can sell from there.
No, absolutely. Perfect. So I want to say thank you very much, Doug. You said info@Hypernomics is a great way to reach out to you so that
Yeah.
they can get a hold of you and look at it. So if anybody wants them to speak, anybody wants them to come talk to them, I'd say go to hypernomics.com, send an email to info@hypernomics.com. And also he's got access to, and I noticed that on your page, you have your software as well. And then you
Mhm.
have the one-time free trial as well, which is very
Yes.
generous kind of deal. And then you can look and say, wow, this is going to be something for me. And there's links to the book. And in the actual show notes, as well as on screen in the different platforms, there are links to the book as well. So I'd say
Very
go
good.
get the book and learn it. So
Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for having me on. It's been my great pleasure. A great show, and I'm really glad to be part of it. Thank you. Appreciate it.
absolutely. Thank you so much. Everybody else,
Thank you.
go out and sell something.